Welcome to GameAbstract Lesson 4. This is the final video in preparing you to actually create your own games using the game library, JavaScript version. So in this one, we're going to talk about managing the game state, as well as demonstrate how to create a simple game object, a sprite, and then how to draw it to the screen. So let's get to it. So in previous videos, we discussed the whole purpose of the resources, how the preload function gets called when the document loads, and it loads the resources, creates a game variable for us, and it calls the game loop. Now the game loop is a recursive function that simply calls itself every 10 milliseconds. And as it's doing that, it's handling all the processing of the keyboard, the mouse, the touch screen, as well as updating the game. Now this middle section, when the game is ready, it's simply going to try to execute the state of the game. So what exactly is the state of the game? So let's create another function. Let's say function init. And let's say the purpose of this function, because the one thing we haven't actually created any sprites or animations or sound objects, things that go into a game. So we'll just kind of put a comma here. Create our game objects. So it'd be nice that at some point we enter this state of the game. At another point, it might make sense for us to enter to the main part of our game. So let's create a function called main. So this main program, game logic. So anything that really has to do with the game is going to go in here. So this is what we call the states of the game. Different places that our code should be executing from. So at some point we want it to be executing the init function. At other points we want to be executing the main function. And honestly, the list can go on. Think of a function in this game framework as a state in the game. So when we go to preload, what we want to do is we want to say game.state is equal to init. And what we're telling the computer here is to set the initial state, set the state of the game to init, the init function. So that way, once the resources are loaded, we're going to go inside of here and actually execute whatever's in here. So let's go ahead and practice actually creating a game object. And one that you're going to be playing around a lot with is your sprite object. So let's review a little bit of our resources. So we've loaded up a logo with an ID of logo, and this is the source location. But if you remember from that particular video, we won't refer to the picture by its location. We'll refer to it by its ID. Right? So let's create a variable called logo. Bring this up a little bit more. And let's set it equal to a new sprite. So similar to the way we created our game object, JavaScript uses the word new to create a new instance of a class. Now, because this is the first time you're doing this, I'm going to go over to the game library and let's scroll all the way down to the sprite class. Oops, I passed it. There we go, sprite class. So the constructor tells you how to construct a new sprite. So you can see here that when you construct a new sprite, it needs an image and a game variable. And there is an option for an X and a Y. But what you'll notice is that the X and the Y are optional. You don't need it. Again, if you kind of look at some of the code in here, it kind of explains why it's optional. But in any case, we're going to use the version of just using the image and the game. So let's go back to our code. Let's go down here. So it needs the image. But again, we won't refer to the image by the actual file name and the location. We're going to refer to it by the resources. So the resources got loaded into the game. And the resources are essentially images and audio. So hopefully this makes sense as I write it. So we're going to say game dot images dot logo. Again, to review it, the way we write this is because the game variable preloaded the resources. So that's the reason for the game right there. Images comes from the fact that it loaded up these resources, images. And the last part is logo. Why? Because we gave this picture the ID of logo. Right? Again, with time, you'll get used to this. And honestly, you only have to do it this one time, because once you create your sprite, you can refer to your logo by the variable name here throughout your main program. If you recall, the last thing that it wants, or the next thing that it wants, is the game. Again, to associate the sprite with this game variable. Okay, so let's assume, right now we're just dealing with the one. But eventually, this might get rather large as you create all the game objects that will exist in your game. But right now we're done. So now that we're done with the function init, we want to set the state of the game to main. Okay. So let's think of the flow. So preload sets the state of the game to init. Init does its job and then sets the state of the game to main. So it goes down here. And all of this is happening inside the game loop, where it's simply executing whatever state of the game you're in. Again, if this is a little bit too much, then just realize you won't have to mess around with the game loop. This pretty much stays the same. And honestly, you're going to want to do game.state equals main right here after your init. The only way this might change is if you start doing like startup screens and some other screens in here. But again, for a simple game, let's just get right to the main. Okay, so we're in the main now. This is the main logic of your game. So what can we do with this new logo that we created? So if you go back to the sprite class and scroll down a little bit, the sprite class has a very simple function called draw. Again, it has an X or Y, which are optional. Okay, you do not have to specify an X and a Y. But if you did, then you would draw it at a specific location. Right now, we're just gonna draw it. So we're gonna say logo.draw. Let's save it. And I like to run my games, not in the small window, but a new window. And there you go. That's the logo. Again, it might not be very exciting, but I want you to think about all the steps that you've done to get yourself here, which is you created 2 new functions, you've managed the state of the game, you've created a new sprite variable, and then you've actually used it to draw. Right. Again, you are now ready to start your first game, Zombie Thanksgiving. So let's go back to our slideshow. So all the things that happen in this particular video series of the GameAbstract, you don't necessarily have to do it every single time. Honestly, every time I create a game, I just use the template that has the resources already in it, the game loop, the init, the main functions. And that's what you're going to see with your first game, Zombie Thanksgiving, that we're going to start from the template. But it made sense to have this video series so you kind of appreciate, what led us to being able to develop the games. So I look forward to seeing what you do with your first game. Bye.